Thank you for joining us.
We just hit the $150 donation mark from Bringing the Rain. And then we have another guy named Teamy. His name in real life, Dan. He just donated an additional 100, so we're at 250 now.
All right.
That is absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much for the donations. We really appreciate that. Probably more than you realize, if I'm being completely honest. So, everyone, my name is Matthew Martin, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about my personal experiences with suicide, primarily in the Air Force, and dealing with these problems. So, going back a few years for me personally, dealing with issues relating to my personal family, it has affected me a lot because I've lost members, even children that I've coached football before, kids younger than myself, who have unfortunately taken their own lives, and that's affected me greatly before, because those are people I personally mentored, I took under my wing, and I personally, have great remorse for feeling like I could have done more for them. So these are things that I take very personally. This is something that I want everyone to realize is a real situation. This isn't training. This isn't just another mark we check on a box, right? This is a real thing. So when we share these stories with you today, I hope everyone realizes that. But as we know, we've already passed the goal today. We're donating everything to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Our goal was $150, and apparently we already smashed it. So, by all means, that is an absolutely fantastic thing. Thank you so much. But the other good thing that we want to bring out to you is this. If for some reason you feel that you cannot donate, which is 100% okay, we want you to know these resources are there. They're great to use, and we want you to know that they're there. Not even just for yourself, but anyone else you know. Understand that if someone is struggling and you are there for them, you want to help them, and you feel that you cannot adequately help them with your knowledge, it's okay to redirect them for a resource as long as you're still there to help them out. Don't just throw a resource at someone and say, okay, go on. But make sure that the resource is available for them and you know how it's used, right? We're going to have a bit more talking points today, but I think before we go into everything else, I want to personally bring on one of our first guests as well, so we can have some more counter talking points as well as some more deeper discussions, not just my personal opinions. So we'd like to bring on our first guest today, if someone wouldn't mind.
And also, we just got Silent Blade, just donated $100 to the foundation.
Thank you so much. We really do appreciate it. So now that means we're at $350, correct?
352.
Absolutely fantastic. Welcome. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm A1C Logan Hegerfeld. I'm with the Night Security Forces Squadron at Beale Air Force Base. And I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to share the experiences with y'all.
So why don't you tell us your story? What do you have to bring to the table today? What would you like to share with everybody?
So for me, it's not more of what I've been through. I've been there a lot for other people who have been through it. I've had people in my family who, they've gone through some rough times. They didn't know where to go, who to talk to, or really just they didn't have the answer for what they were going through, and they resulted into, close to being suicide. None of them went through it. They got the help they needed, and the main thing for that was
We're going to have our guest as well.
What's up, everybody? My name is Airman Pikus, also Airman Asa Martin Pikus from the 9th Security Force Squadron at Beale Air Force Base.
So we're going to be providing your gameplay while our fabulous airman here tells us his story.
Okay. But yeah, so they got the they got the help they needed, and there's a lot of people out there right now who they don't have that help, and it's causing a lot of the issues that we have, especially for in this sense. We'll take it to a military sense. A lot of the people who join the military, they're trained. They're told to, talk when they're told to, and basically shrug it off. And so it's hard for a lot of people who've been through the military, especially the military, the wives and husbands, because when they come home and their spouse is acting different, they really don't know how to react, because one, their spouse doesn't tell them about it because they're pretty much trained to forget about those feelings and keep them all locked inside. And that's what kills and eats us up the most. So a big thing with that is just really making sure that you talk to them. And
Now, if I may add something.
Mhm.
So there's all, here we go. So there's the person who's going through the unfortunate or more of a cloudy situation than we are. You know them best. You are the one who knows them best compared to everybody else. So you have to, look for different signs like, are they coming home late? Are they drinking more? Or maybe if let's say it's a kid, is a kid not talking and engaging in class anymore? Are they not being social anymore? Those are all big important cues and clues that us as a nation and us as just people, we have to be aware of those. Now there's a lot more to it, but when you find that something's not right, you have to ask a very important question. And it's a very serious question that a lot of people are afraid to ask. And the question is this: you have to ask, are you going to kill yourself? To that individual. And as hard as it sounds, you have to say that, because subconsciously, nobody wants to hurt themselves, and we have to be there. And after you ask them that hard question, hey, do you want to kill yourself? The next step is that you need to say, hey, look, how can I help you? And maybe you might not be close to that person. Still, be like, hey, how can I help you? Who can I reach out to? Do you have any family, friends that, or somebody, But at the end of the day, when you find that individual wants to do something, you have to act and help them right away.
So personally, I would have to agree with that. I think one of the major things that people need to understand, even people who are trained or not trained, is that a lot of the times the situations that we run into with these kinds of problems are never going to be as clear cut as we want them to be. It's never going to be just, oh, this person is clearly demonstrating this issue as demonstrated in the training that we got last week. It's not going to be like that. So when you have problems like this, it takes someone to be very attentive. It takes someone to really try to understand why this person could be dealing with this. And I think sometimes because we usually find ourselves in such a groove that it's hard to really just try and look beyond the norm and see that sometimes someone's just having a bad day. But I personally am of the belief that there's nothing wrong with just asking. As someone who has been having a lot of issues the past few years and has gone to clinic for personal issues, medication, things like that, no one is ever going to be upset that you just ask them if they're doing all right or if there's a problem, because at least you care enough to ask. And that means a lot to people. It really does. So never feel that, they clearly don't want to be talked to or they clearly don't want to be asked. No one's ever really going to hold that against you. And if for some reason they do, and they might be upset at you now, I guarantee you they will probably apologize for it later, or at least explain to you why they reacted in such a way. But there is absolutely nothing wrong with just asking. No one really will hold it against you, because to me, it at least shows that you care, right? And I think one of the things that we really should touch on, especially for our military folk that may be watching, are the resources that we have available to us. So one of the first things that I usually recommend to people that are having issues is going to the chaplain. The chaplain is a great resource, not even just for religious issues, but for just anyone who wants to talk about anything. Because of the confidentiality that they provide as a service, they're usually one of the best things that I can recommend to somebody. Going to the chaplain, I've gone to them numerous times for issues that were nowhere near religiously affiliated. So don't think that, oh, it's just because I'm not of this religious belief or I'm not religious, period, doesn't mean that you can't go to them. They are more than welcome to help you out, as they should. And because of the great confidentiality they provide, they are honestly one of the best resources that you can have. And most squadrons nowadays usually can have one in-house. So they're usually not always available, but they're very good with their people. So that's good. That's a good thing to have. And then you have, obviously, your normal mental health facilities at your local clinic. You have MFLAC, which is, don't keep records of your appearances at all. Military Family Life Counseling, they will always be there to help you out unless there's really a bigger problem going on. If you just need to go there to talk or have issues, they won't bother you just saying, hey, what's going on? It's a really good thing to have. So I want to make sure everyone knows that even if you personally don't believe in using these resources, that's okay. Really, that is. I can understand that. However, it's good to know these for somebody else, because I think everyone should be always knowledgeable on where to go when other people you know are struggling. If you personally don't want to use them, that's totally okay. But please know them regardless of that. Anyone else have anything to add for that? No? Okay.
The best way you can say it.
So it looks like we have somebody else coming in.
Yes, sir. Why don't you
Here.
introduce yourself?
I'm Airman First Class Massey from the 9th Force Support Squadron.
I'll take it so you can talk.
So today I'm going to be sharing a personal experience. It dates back February of 2019, about mid-February time frame. I get a random call about 11 o'clock at night saying that my 14-year-old cousin has committed suicide. I reacted as anyone would, in anger. I bawled my eyes out for hours, and then I talked to my leadership, and within the next few days I was back home in Ohio. Suicide is a big deal to me. I've had a couple friends, obviously I had a cousin, but I'm here to talk about her. She was 14 years old. I was told she didn't show any signs of really feeling depressed or anything. It happens. Suicide happens at all ages, and yeah, I just want to make that clear. Yeah, I gotta go.
One of the big things to keep in mind when you have these kind of issues is that this can happen at all ages. Now, usually it's always a bit more common in your older people, but just because, as our guest just mentioned, just because somebody's younger doesn't exhibit the signs doesn't mean they're immune to having these thoughts. I would almost say that it can be a bit more versatile or volatile in those situations, because your younger people are not as emotionally in tune and usually can't control themselves, so almost they're more prone to reacting emotionally. So you need to be almost extra careful, because at that age, everything usually sticks with them. So for someone like me who's had some issues growing up, everything that affected me as a child still affects me as a grown adult. I'm 24. Point being that it still plays a part in my mind, regardless of how old it will be. What happened to me that I remember when I was 5 still affects me as an adult. So it's very important to recognize that just because someone is younger doesn't mean these situations can't affect them, because it's almost more common than you want to think. Especially nowadays with how young people communicate, the fact that a lot more people are more stressed out, depression is becoming more common, and that social pressures are just becoming more commonplace in our young teenagers and young adults. It's probably more prevalent than ever to keep mind on this, because of how different it is nowadays in comparison to almost 20 years ago. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
So yeah, I mean, obviously this, everybody has their stories, and it's not always easy to express, especially since you actually go through it. I'm very fortunate I've never experienced it, but that doesn't mean that we ignore it. That doesn't mean that I'm going to ignore the signs, and just because it doesn't happen to me right now doesn't mean that I'm immune to it. We're all human. We all have to look out for each other, and I think we just have to remember we're human, and we all have to just be out there for each other. And if another thing, I think if somebody has a cloudy vision, or they need a little bit more of an uplift, maybe like see what they like to do, because maybe they lost their way, maybe they lost their goals, because goals and visions are what strive people to continue. And when people have no goals and no vision, people feel lost and cloudy. So maybe would that be something?
I would definitely agree. And I think one thing that I would personally like to throw on top of that, if you don't mind, is I think one thing that always helped me is if you really want to help someone in a situation like this, the best advice I can offer you is learn something that means a lot to them, and then truly embrace it for that person. So for me, the things that mean a lot to me is music. And sometimes if I want someone to relate to me, I won't have the proper words to say. I'll just say, I want you to listen to this and try to understand that. And sometimes that really just does better than any words I could ever say. So if you really want to help someone, ask them, what means a lot to you? And what keeps you going? Like, it can be anything. It can be a video game. It can be music. It could be a book. It could literally be anything. The thing to keep in mind is no matter what your opinions are on that thing, do not demean it in any kind of way. Doesn't matter if you don't like it. Doesn't matter if it's not something you would ever touch with a 10-foot pole. Fact of the matter is you need to be able to fully embrace what makes them who they are. It's important because clearly it means the world to them if they want to share it with you. You know.
Now, I know I covered a few signs, but what's maybe a few more other signs that we look out for? So obviously, people who are distant, not talking as much. What other?
I would say one of the few things to keep in mind is not so upfront reckless behavior. If you notice that your guy, someone that works out regularly, eats pretty well, all of a sudden starts showing up to work every day with fast food, frozen meals, or just starts taking poor care of themselves, they're not shaving as much, their hair doesn't look as crisp, their uniform is starting to look sloppy, there's probably an issue there too. And usually people chalk that up to, they're just having a bad day, bad week, or they're falling behind, it's no big deal. People who take pride in their appearance and pride and stuff like that, if they start falling behind, there's probably a bigger reason for something like that.
Yeah, and I do feel, one last thing, I do feel that a lot of people, when people have bad days, they just brush it off to the side. Because I'm a very outgoing person. I take my job very serious, but also like to laugh and have a good time. And everybody who knows me and works with me definitely knows that. So if I ever had an experience where I'm coming to work sad, not smiling, I would hope that somebody comes to me and says, hey, Asa, what's going on?
Right.
Right, because we all want to be taken care of.
And of course, the one thing that means a lot to people in that situation is, does someone recognize it? You know what I mean?
Yes.
So, appreciate you having you on.
Hey,
really
thank
do.
you very much. Appreciate it.
Y'all don't want me to play. I don't know how to play Minecraft, but
Don't feel bad. I don't really either until today. It's okay.
but hopefully I can share a story of a really good friend of mine. Oh, so I'm Sergeant Self. I work intel at the 548th OSS. I kind of work with Sergeant Martin and Sergeant Hardin, who's behind the scenes over here doing an amazing job, by the way. So this was 5 years ago. I was a brand new A1C at my first duty station. And somebody that I was dating actually was suicidal. So I'm not going to say any names because some of these people could still be in. But so this individual, you would never guess that this individual would ever have any issues. He was kind to people. He was funny. He never said anything that would really alarm you. Until one night we were hanging out. It was after swing shift. We were back at the dorms, and I had fallen asleep. And he was just saying stuff, like he was just talking to himself. And I was genuinely frightened. And so he was saying things like, nobody knows how dark my thoughts are, no one knows me, just things that would really kind of worry you. And so I listened for a while, kind of pretending that I was still asleep. And then when I woke up, after he had kind of calmed down a little bit, I asked him if he was okay, and he kind of pretended like nothing had happened. So he said, yeah, I'm fine. And I said, okay, well, do you want to go get food or something? We had this place called Perkins that was always open 24/7. They served breakfast food, and he didn't want to get food. And I was like, well, are you doing okay? Like, I asked him again. He said, I'm fine. I was like, okay, well, I'm not getting anywhere. And at this point, I asked him, are you thinking about hurting yourself? And he said, no. And I said, I heard what you were saying. Are you thinking about killing yourself? And he said, yes. And so at this point, I was really scared, guys. I had no idea what to do. I was like, oh no, somebody just said that they were legitimately thinking about harming themselves, and that he told me that he was going to do it that night. And so, luckily his family was in town. And so this is where like the whole ask, care, escort thing comes in. You have to ask people if they're thinking about it. You have to care for them, and then you have to escort them. So luckily his family was in town, like I said. I drove him to where his family was staying. They knew that he had a history of depression, and I didn't know it until that night, but in high school he had attempted suicide once before. Luckily, his family knew about this, so they were able to take care of him that night. And then I actually had a security forces friend that was on shift that night. So I had no idea what to do. I went to my security forces friend who helped me out, and they got me in contact with my leadership who found out pretty immediately that night. And so the next day I was talking to my leadership about everything. They were very helpful for the most part. He went to mental health. And this also goes into the stigma about mental health. If you go to mental health, it doesn't mean it's a career ender. So this individual, he did hold a TS/SCI clearance. When he went to mental health, they determined that he could no longer hold that clearance. So he was force retrained out of his career field and into paralegal. I don't know if he's still in or anything like that, but he went on after seeing mental health and getting the help he needed, serving out at least the rest of his enlistment, and having actually a really great career for the most part. So, yeah.
I think one of the big things to keep in mind too for these people, that's kind of something I want to personally touch on, is that if someone holds a clearance like that, just because they got into the career field and they've been doing it for a little bit doesn't mean they're still cut out for it. You can be in something for a long time and finally realize, I'm not made for this. Just like being in the military, people can be in for 5 to 6 years and be like, this is not for me. Or even 10 years, it happens. So being force retrained out of a career field you're clearly not meant to be sustained in isn't necessarily a bad thing.
No, not at all. And the Air Force can still use everybody's talents. So.
Oh yeah, and the fact that you've held a clearance like that also means you know how that type of realm works, makes you good in other areas as well. It doesn't all of a sudden mean you're useless, get out. That's not at all how that works.
Exactly. And then a huge mistake that I made that I hope no one ever makes, and I am so ashamed to admit this, but after that incident, I actually never personally spoke to him again, aside from, this is really bad, aside from just saying hi in the hallways at work, and I should not have done that. If you were ever in my situation, please continue to reach out to that person and ask them how they're doing, because I'm sure that really hurt him. And I should not have done that. So learn from my mistake as well. Be a good friend. If you're ever in that situation, you're helping somebody else. So.
Because one thing that's going to mean a lot to these people is the follow-up, right? So if you were to escort someone to the situation like this, and all of a sudden you just stop reaching out or communicating, it kind of just sends the message that you did what you had to do, you checked the box, and then you just left it as it was. Now, clearly that's not at all what she internally was meaning at all.
No.
But it can come across.
No.
It can come across that
Yes.
that way is the key thing.
You really do not want me to play. You guys don't know how much you don't want me to play.
Don't feel bad. I'm still figuring this out as I go. I'm still clicking the wrong buttons half the time.
And another thing, if I zoned out and repeat, it's not a bad thing to repeat, is sometimes a lot of people don't say anything because, maybe they think, oh, it's not their problem, or maybe it's not that and they just don't have a lot of time, or they have enough on their plate and it's, that'd be too much for them. In a sense, if you honestly can't yourself help this individual, you can at least help them find somebody who can. And that's one big thing, because if you think, or if it's in the sense where, oh, it's not your problem. Well, you got to think of it in a sense where, what if it becomes your problem one day and you need help? Or maybe you can look back on what you did in the past and that'll help you progress faster, and help you and possibly save a life.
Yeah.
One of the good things to keep in mind too is that in the military, when you have wingmen, you have people you work with, you're kind of always everybody's problem to an extent. We're one big family, right? So try not to treat people as it's not my problem or not, rank or not. The situation, one thing to keep in mind is that it happens at all ages and it happens at all ranks. If you and A1C notice that a master sergeant or above is having problems, there is absolutely nothing wrong with asking that master sergeant, hey, are you okay? Because just because they have rank sometimes doesn't always mean they got life figured out either. Yeah. So they can struggle just like you can. Just because they have more stripes does not mean that they are immune to struggling.
And think about it too, those NCOs and those senior NCOs, like those flight chiefs, they're the ones that are usually helping everyone else in their flight with their issues. So a lot of times they don't get the opportunity to say how they're feeling. So reach out, even if they seem stressed out. A simple like, hey, are you okay? Even if you're an A1C, can at least make them smile, if anything else. And sometimes that's all somebody needs.
It's a really good thing to do. I understand that sometimes rank can be a little bit of a gray area with some people, but like I said before, no one's ever going to fault you for just asking, hey, are you doing okay? Or do you want to talk, you know? In a situation like that, I'm not saying rank isn't a thing, but people tend to not treat it that way. So.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thank you for having me, guys.
Of course.
We just got another donation, $50 from No Land Beyond.
So what are we at now?
I changed the goal to 400, and that just made it past 400. So 400 treasure.
Absolutely fantastic.
Now, while Sergeant was explaining her story, thank you. Now, there's some things that you don't want to do. When somebody says, hey, I do want to kill myself, or I do want to hurt myself, don't blow it off and say, oh, it's nothing, no big deal, you'll get over it. Like, you know, people go through this for all different circumstances. It could be bullying. It could be, in the military, it could be workplace bullying. It could be getting deployed because you're about to have a child and you feel helpless because you're not there to witness your newborn or your firstborn. You know what I mean? Also, like bullying. What other causes of?
I think one of the biggest things I can think of
In the military, yeah.
can be ignorance. And and that's not just military, that can be life in general. So one of the things that I personally stand by is that pain is relative. And what I mean by that is just because something didn't break you does not mean it will not break somebody else. So just because it's not the straw that broke your camel's back doesn't mean it won't be for somebody else. Just because someone's in a situation and went back in your day, you just dealt with it and had to, you know, carry 100 pounds up a cliff walking backwards, that's fine. But it can be a lot for somebody else to handle. So don't just think that just because you could deal with it, no problem, doesn't mean everybody else should as well. That's not how things are. Pain is relative, and everyone is going to break at some point. And one of the things to keep in mind is you don't know how much of a load they've been carrying up until it was just that one small thing. Because honestly, for some people, that's really all it takes. It can just be dropping your food on the way into work that can just make them lose their mind. It can just be something absolutely so small and nonsensical that can just send them over. And you'll think, wow, that's a pretty dumb thing to get upset about, until you actually dive deeper into it and realize that this person's been carrying a load, and this just happened to be the thing that just sent them over. So never treat the situation as it didn't break me, it shouldn't break you. Never treat it that way.
Exactly, because we're all born, I mean, with flesh and blood, same thing, but we all have different feelings. We all have different backgrounds that we've come from. So we have to be understanding and be sensitive, regardless of what your opinion is of the matter.
Right, and if you do have your opinions, just keep them to yourself. That's the best thing you can really do, is just that if you really think that what this person is dealing with for some reason is just, for lack of a better term, either dumb or stupid, just keep that to yourself. That's really all I can say. There's no good way to communicate that. Just keep it to yourself. Don't communicate to anybody else, especially no one that knows that person, because honestly, it doesn't help anybody. Just leave it as it is. You know, no one needs that kind of information or that kind of put down in that situation, because they're already struggling. And if your opinion means a lot to that person, that could honestly just push them over, especially if they truly value your opinion. So don't be the person that has to say something like that. That's a key thing as well.
I agree.
And one of the cool things that we touched on that Sergeant Stealth did kind of go into as well, that I want to bring into, and this is actually the primary point of our last stream that we did with our few sergeants that are playing Call of Duty, was that we're not a one and done Air Force anymore. There's no you messed up one time, you're out, you're done, we don't want you. I've seen people stay in for a variety of mistakes that humans will and people will make. So there's no more of just, you messed up one time, we have no use, no reason for you. Especially at a younger rank, it's literally expected for you to mess up. Granted, here and there, some things are a little bit, okay, why are you doing this? Point being, though, is that we don't expect you to be perfect. No one's perfect at almost any rank. So don't treat a situation as this is going to be the one thing one little thing that I do that gets me kicked out. That's not at all how that works. It's never really been that way. People have made mistakes and they can unfortunately treat it like that, but it's not like that.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of people are afraid of in the military because, especially since we're always like in BMT. I think it started in BMT where people were afraid to get sick.
Oh, they're afraid to get
And-
sick. They're afraid to mess up because that 341 killer to be like, oh crap, I'm getting out.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like now, looking back on it, obviously it's not. It doesn't mean nearly as
No,
much as they say
not
it
at all.
does at all. But at that moment, at that time, that 341, you going down to the flight office and telling your TIs how much you just broke the Air Force and why you're a disgrace of a trainee. I had to do that. I remember that conversation, why I was a failure and why my terrible ability to fold my clothes affected Air Force readiness. I had that conversation. So at that time, it can mean the world to you. So never treat a situation, like at that moment, it can just be nonsensical to that person. It can mean a lot to them because it meant a lot to me at that time. Now looking back on it, I know that comment probably never went past anywhere besides her Microsoft Word. But still, at the time, that's the key thing. At that time is what it matters to that person. Don't ever look at someone and say, well, in a little bit, it won't mean as much. Just be sensitive to the situation as it stands right now.
Yep, absolutely.
Do any of our off-site guests have anything else they'd like to add today? No one?
So I do have one thing,
All right.
just one.
I'll hit the controller back.
So
Thank you.
I think bringing it back more to the Air Force, I think we hear a lot of people talk about toxic leadership, and you hear that term like thrown around like just constantly, right?
It's thrown around so
Yes.
much, and I think I know where you're going to go with this, but go right ahead.
So for the most part, I can honestly say like leadership does not want, they're not out to get you, like they want what's best for you. They're there to help you. They're there to nourish you, to support you. But I will give you an example of truly a toxic leader. So through my situation, that next day, I had to go talk to my squadron leadership about everything that happened. The chief in that squadron at the time was an individual that I would describe as toxic leadership. And at the time, I was an A1C, so I didn't think anything of it. I was just like, yeah, chief, like, you're so right, like, And now, as a staff, I'm like, I don't know about that. But, so I was sitting in his office, and I tell him everything that happened, right? And he starts asking me questions, and I tell him that previously he had tried to commit suicide, and he had seen a therapist and stuff, and do you remember, Sergeant Martin, when you had to do the SF-86 and they start asking you about your mental health history and everything?
Yeah, it's they style it pretty, I'll say, it's pretty intimidating the way they do it because the way they style the entire SF-86 basically says we're going to go into every facet of your life, so you better be honest.
Yeah, and the SF-86, for those of you that don't know, is pretty much like our background check on paper, essentially. I don't know how else to explain that. It's a really long document.
It's incredibly detailed, and you have to update it every 7 years.
So on this document, they do ask you about your mental health, if you've seen a therapist, your family, all of this stuff. So the chief he said, well, if he had tried to commit suicide before and he had seen a therapist, if he has a TS, he must have lied, and he must have falsified an official document. And when he said that, he alluded to getting this individual out of the Air Force. And like I said at the time, I didn't think anything of it. But now as a staff, I have so many things I could say about it. It almost angers me that the first thing that a chief would think about or say the day after someone comes forward with these feelings is, we should get this person out. That should never be someone's first response.
And that's the stigma that prevents people from
Yes.
coming forward about this is, well, there goes my career, my paycheck, everything.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things, too, to keep in mind, and that's something that I really want to touch on, is that we had our tactical pause, down day, whatever you want to call it, on Wednesday.
Ours was awesome, by the way.
I thought so.
Yeah.
So one of the things I got to keep in mind, and that I think being part of all these Air Force pages that are like toxic leadership this, toxic leadership that, they don't try hard enough, they don't do this. Imagine if you're in this leadership position, because few key personnel are, if everything you ever did was not good enough, it was toxic, it was terrible, you apparently don't try hard enough, that's going to really start to wear on you because literally everything you do in the eyes of your personnel is a failure. My key point to try and get across here is that your leadership, believe it or not, are people too. And some of the things that I won't go into detail because that's their business and we swore we wouldn't bring it up, that I've heard my commander, my superintendent go through, I never in my life would have painted these individuals going through that. Because our commander, he's a pretty tough guy. And when we heard that story, I was like, what? I was genuinely taken aback. And that's something to keep in mind, is that they're people too and they have their struggles. But they're in a position where they literally have to and keep it together for you. Because that's their job, is you. So please keep in mind that at the end of the day, they're people too, and they don't want to be told that everything they do is toxic or failure. Now, granted, call bad leadership where it is. There's no excuse for that, but don't treat everything like it's not enough because I can assure you that people do try for you.
And the next time you think about commenting like, oh, I have toxic leadership.
Did you communicate that? Did you ask?
Yeah, try to think about things from their perspective and also try to think about the example that I provided you of someone who may have actually been truly toxic leadership as well. So, yeah.
All right. Does anyone have anything else?
You want to just do a little wrap up?
Yeah, definitely.
If you want to have any parting words? Anyone in the chat have anything cool or anything you'd like to add that we can bring out or talk about?
One of them, the Scary Monster, says that you guys are amazing.
Thank you.
I know. Thank you so much.
So yeah, that basically, I guess, would conclude it. I mean, so just keep in mind, guys, look who you have in your home. If they are not acting the same, if they're not acting the way you know they're supposed to act, ask them the question. Ask them that tough question. Are you going to hurt yourself? Are you going to kill yourself? And then from there, what would be the next step? Act or who would you go to?
Personally, in this situation, depending on how they answer, the best thing you need to do for these kind of people, if they say yes or no, is to make sure that no matter what you do, you're there for them and you understand their wants and their needs. Yep. At this point, the one thing you really cannot do is leave this person alone or blow it off. Now, I would like to think that most people in that situation wouldn't, but I would have to say that worse things have happened. So the key thing to do in the situation is, if you do not feel equipped to handle the situation as it is, escort them to the people who you know can. And then when you do that, stay with them, help them, take them there, take them home, learn about the situation too, so that way if another person comes to you about the situation, you can help them. The key thing that the people in these situations want is just, to put it simply, is just for someone to care. All they truly want is for someone to listen to them. And that's why I said learn about them. Learn about what makes them who they are. Learn about what means a lot to them. Learn about what makes them happy. If you can do that, I can promise you that you will make a difference in their life for always the better, because you're showing them that someone actually cares. And that's really all I have, is just stand by it. And one of the things that I want to bring complete attention to, which is why I'm now currently floating in the space of Minecraft, is look at the gloriousness that we, primarily my friend here, because he apparently has more experience in this than I do, is these magnificent things that we have built today. Well, me and all my nonsense have minimally contributed. I think that we have done a fantastic time building together a nice little complex. And the reason we didn't bring any attention to this is because we want to show you the idea of team building and what you can accomplish together just by purely communicating. If you notice, the only thing that I communicated at any point during this stream when we were building any of this was, hey, I'm trying to put a door here. And I did that under my breath. All of this was done purely just by being next to one another. If we can accomplish doing this purely by just being physically next to each other, imagine what you can do for someone just by talking to them, right? Okay. That is the key thing. Communicate these things. If you really think there's a problem going on, talk. There's nothing wrong with asking. I'll say that a million times over. But unless anyone else has anything, I think it is about time we say our goodbyes. If our Master Sergeant Perez has anything else he'd like to add, or a wonderful executive producer, I think we will say goodbye.
I think we're good.
Alrighty. I thank you all for coming out. Thank you guys so much for the donations. It means the world to us. You guys have smashed our goal at least, 3 times?
Yes.
We got almost. Let's see, we got 400, so we got over 200% of the goal.
Absolutely
Wow.
fantastic. I really can't ask for better. Like, you guys are fantastic. These are the kind of people, you guys are the kind of people that we want attacking these kinds of issues. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you for watching us build this magnificent, beautiful buildings, and we will see you all next time on Beal Top 3 TTV. Goodbye.